I'm gonna apologize for whispering because it's 3 o'clock in the morning, well, 3:30. I don't wanna wake Linda up. Today, I'm gonna teach you how to shoot a time lapse. I'm gonna give you the best tips, tricks, things that I use, things that I've learned, mistakes I've made in the past, so hopefully you can shoot better time lapses. I think it's safe to say we should get to our location so I can stop whispering. I'm Paul Dillon. Welcome to my YouTube channel. I think it's important to note, this might be obvious, but you don't have to wake up super early to do a time lapse. I'm just I'm trying to capture the sunrise. You guys remember Cody, right? If you don't know, I'll link his channel below. Even though it's a little cloudy, we're still gonna be able to shoot a time lapse today. May not be able to get that, epic sunrise type video. Did I just use the word epic? I did. Time lapses still help tell a story, and that's why we're here. I did not use time lapses enough early on in my vlogs, and I still don't. You don't necessarily have to shoot a time lapse with an intervalometer to take photos. You can essentially just set up the camera and let it go for 20-30 minutes and then speed it up in post. That will help you tell a story. It'll help fill in the gaps between something. In the beginning, I made a huge mistake of saying, hey, I'm here at my house, we're gonna do this today, and then snap, I'm there talking to you already. Had I had a time lapse in between there, I think Casey Neistat does a really great job of using the city time lapse and people moving and cars. It just helps tell a story, it helps fill in those gaps. So the time lapse doesn't necessarily have to be a photo time lapse, but that's what we're here to shoot today. So we're back from our little adventure. I'm gonna head home. Before we head home and I show you the settings in the camera, so there's two major things you're gonna need to shoot a good time lapse. One's gonna be a tripod, two is gonna be the intervalometer. So you can use the external one that I shared earlier, or you can use the one that comes in most cameras. If you use an external one, you do have to put the camera in bulb, so that way the camera knows that you're going to be programming it from an external source. So let's head home. We'll go through some of the settings that I use for some time lapses. Before we go though, funny story. So this is how tired I am. Cody and I were walking back. Ruined the moment. The moment's ruined. It's gone, it's done. Look at this guy. Who is he? Who does he think he is? Who does this guy think he is? Funny story though, this is how tired we are. We're walking back. We get to the first parking lot. Thought our cars got towed. Both of us were like super scared. We're asking people that work here. Long story short, we parked in the second parking lot and here's my car. So we didn't get towed. I personally love time lapses. I've been a huge fan of time lapses for a really long time. You get to see Mother Nature, you get to see the world in a way that you would never see before. I mean, clouds are constantly moving, the Milky Way is changing, stars are coming up, the sun is rising and setting. The way the camera captures it is a way that you don't get to see it with your naked eye. And I absolutely love, I am obsessed with time lapses. Now, as far as camera settings go, before we jump into the intervalometer, there's some things in the camera you want to take into consideration. You don't want to leave auto white balance on because as the sun rises and or sets, the lights do change. Maybe you have cloud movements that cover the sun. So you want to set a white balance. Setting a white balance is going to base on your personal preference. When you're shooting raw, you have the ability to adjust those white balances afterwards anyways. You just don't want to let the white balance be controlled by your camera. Same goes for focus. You want to make sure that you're in manual focus. And depending on your story, you might have your foreground element in focus or the background in focus. So it's gonna just depend on the story you're trying to tell. Unless you're using an expensive bulb ramping kit you're most likely using an internal intervalometer. If you have the version 3 firmware in one of the Sony Alpha cameras, you have the internal intervalometer. Now, unless you're using an expensive bulb ramping kit, I personally recommend you use aperture priority. You can lock in your ISO settings, so if you want to make sure that you have minimal noise, and you can keep your f-stop or aperture, that way your field of view doesn't change. The camera will lock in those settings and it will change the shutter speed based on whether it wants to let more light or less light. But let's get into the settings. So if you're using one of the Sony cameras, you're gonna go to menu 1. The first setting is gonna be your start time. This is kind of nice because you can set up how many seconds before it actually starts. So once you push the shutter button, you don't have to worry about introducing any kind of weird camera shake from you actually hitting the start button. I usually just leave this about a second or two. The next one you're gonna see is interval. This is the amount of time in between each shot. Now, if you notice when you do make this adjustment, it does affect the overall time, so just keep that in mind as well. Changing the interval between each shot will affect the speed of your time lapse as well. It all depends on the story that I'm trying to tell. Do I want a lot? Do I want fast cloud movement or slow cloud movement? This is gonna matter, so you're just gonna have to play around with that and see what you personally like. The next one we have in the interval settings is your number of shots. This is the number of shots that your camera is going to take in your time lapse. Now notice at the bottom of the screen, when you change the number of shots, this will affect your overall time. So if you are trying to capture the sunrise or sunset and you have an hour before sunrise, you don't want to do it at an hour because then the sun's going to come up and your time lapse is going to stop. So you want to take this into consideration. So keeping a watch, keeping your phone, something like that is really going to help you tell that time. The next one you have is track sensitivity. The exposure track sensitivity, this will help adjust, kind of help with that flicker a little bit. I personally don't use the intervalometer in the camera because my Rhino slider has an app built into it that does those slight adjustments for me, but it's very similar to aperture priority. Now, as far as foreground element, a lot of people say you have to have a foreground element in your time lapse. That's not entirely true because it really depends on the story that you're trying to tell. If you're out in Joshua Tree and you want people to know you're in Joshua Tree, then you might want to put a cactus or an actual Joshua Tree in there. But if you're trying to show the vast open space that you're in, or you're trying to show the Milky Way change or maybe some mountain ranges, then you don't necessarily have a foreground element, you just have a wide open space. So it all comes down to the story that you're trying to tell with your time lapse. I'm by no means an expert in time lapses. I make a ton of mistakes. I still to this day make a ton of mistakes, but that's the only way you're gonna get better. I still to this day sometimes forget and leave autofocus on or auto white balance. It happens. The only way you're gonna get better is to make mistakes. That's all about being 1% better every day, is to make those small steps in the right direction. I hope I inspired some of you guys to get out and shoot time lapses. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and remember, 1% better every day.